After 40 years of service, I finally retired. I thought it was time for peace, family dinners, and quiet mornings with coffee. But on the very first week of my retirement, my father, an 82-year-old man, looked us all in the eye and said something that froze the room. "None of you will touch my pension." That sentence, spoken in his gravelly voice, hit like a hammer on the table. Silence filled the living room. My siblings and I exchanged glances, unsure if we had heard him right. You see, my father had spent his entire life working at a manufacturing company in Ohio. He never made millions, but he worked hard, contributed to his 401k retirement plan, invested in a pension fund, and always reminded us how important it was to save for the future. He was a man who never missed paying into Social Security and always kept his health insurance premiums up to date. So when he retired, we assumed things would be straightforward. The pension would support him, maybe some of it would be used for household needs, and eventually it would pass on to his children. After all, isn't that how most families handle it? But his words told us otherwise. "Dad, what do you mean?" I asked carefully. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and said, "I earned every cent of that pension, and I'll use it for my health care, my long-term care, and my peace of mind. I don't want any of you circling around me like vultures, waiting for a check." It was harsh, but deep down, I understood where he was coming from. At his age, the biggest fear wasn't death, it was dependency. He didn't want to rely on us. He wanted control. My younger brother, however, wasn't so understanding. "Come on, Dad. You've got Medicare. You've got insurance. Why not let us manage the pension? We could invest it better." That was the wrong thing to say. My father's eyes narrowed. I've heard too many stories of families losing everything because someone gambled with their retirement savings. This pension is not a lottery ticket. It's my lifeline. The conversation ended abruptly, but the tension only grew in the days that followed. On Sunday dinner, my sister whispered to me, "Do you think Dad has a will, or is he just planning to spend everything before he goes?" I didn't know the answer, but I knew one thing. This wasn't just about money. It was about boundaries, legal rights, and the harsh realities of retirement planning in America. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake his words. "None of you will touch my pension." It wasn't just a warning. It was a line drawn in the sand. And little did we know, that line would soon divide our family in ways we could never imagine. What we thought was just Dad's stubbornness turned into legal consultations, hidden documents, and a shocking revelation about who really had control over his retirement funds.
When my father made that bold statement about his pension, I thought it was just talk. A proud old man protecting what he worked for. But a week later, we discovered something that proved he wasn't bluffing. He had already met with a retirement advisor and a lawyer behind our backs. It started with a simple phone call. I was visiting Dad when the phone rang. His voice grew softer as he spoke, but I caught phrases like, "Yes, the pension plan beneficiary options," and long-term care coverage. When he hung up, he looked startled to see me standing there. "Who was that?" I asked. He hesitated. Then he said firmly, "My retirement planner. None of your business." That stung. None of my business? He was my father. But then I realized he had drawn the line and I had crossed it. Later that evening, my sister came over with papers in her hand. She had been snooping through Dad's mail. "Look," she whispered, spreading out a glossy brochure on the table. It was from a financial planning firm that specialized in pension funds, Medicare supplemental insurance, and estate planning. The appointment date was circled in pen, tomorrow at 10 a.m. We were shocked. Dad wasn't just guarding his pension, he was taking legal steps to make sure none of us could touch it. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I drove to the office building listed on the brochure. I sat in the parking lot like a detective on a stakeout. And sure enough, I saw him walk in, leaning on his cane, carrying a folder full of documents. I wanted to follow him inside, but something stopped me. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was fear of hearing what he was planning. So I waited. An hour later, he walked out with a satisfied look on his face, as though a weight had been lifted. That evening, I confronted him. "Dad, I know you met with a lawyer and a retirement advisor. What's going on?" His expression hardened. "You're snooping. I told you, this is my pension, not yours. I have every right to secure it how I see fit." "But Dad, don't you trust us? Don't you trust me?" His voice shook, but his words were sharp. Trust is earned, not assumed. When it comes to money, especially retirement savings, you can't afford blind trust. I worked for 40 years to build this pension. I won't see it vanish because of family disputes or poor decisions. That night, he revealed more. The lawyer had suggested creating a living trust for his pension payouts, ensuring they could only be used for health care, insurance premiums, and essential living expenses. He was also considering a long-term care insurance policy that would eat up a chunk of the funds, but guarantee he wouldn't be a burden. Hearing this, my siblings were furious. My brother slammed his fist on the table. "So that's it. You're cutting us out entirely. After everything we've done for you?" Dad's response was chilling. "You didn't earn this money. I did. And I will decide how it is used. If that means you get nothing, so be it." The room went silent. For the first time in my life, I saw my father not just as a parent, but as a soldier guarding his last battlefield, his retirement. But then something else came to light. A neighbor mentioned casually that they had seen my father at the county clerk's office. Why would he be there? That's when we realized it wasn't just about lawyers and advisors. He was possibly changing legal documents, maybe even rewriting his will. My mind raced. What was he planning? Was he leaving everything to charity? Was he cutting us out completely? One thing was certain. My father wasn't just protecting his pension. He was preparing for war.
The tension in our family had reached a boiling point. Every dinner felt like sitting around a ticking time bomb. My father, stubborn as ever, carried on with his routines, doctor's appointments, morning walks, even his Friday poker games at the senior center. But beneath it all, there was secrecy. That secrecy finally broke the day he called a family meeting. We gathered in his living room, me, my brother, my sister, and even my mother, who had stayed out of the pension arguments until now. Dad sat in his recliner, a stack of papers in his lap. His hand shook slightly, not from weakness, but from the gravity of what he was about to do. "Since you all seem so concerned about my money," he began, his voice sharp, "I'm going to lay this out once and for all. These," he held up the papers, "are the legal arrangements for my pension, retirement savings, and health care." He passed the documents to my sister first. As she scanned them, her face went pale. She handed them to me without a word. I looked down and felt my stomach drop. The first document was a revocable living trust, drafted by his attorney. It stated clearly that all pension payments would be deposited into the trust. The funds could only be withdrawn for specific purposes: healthcare costs, insurance premiums, long-term care, and essential living expenses. Not a single dollar could be distributed to heirs until his passing, and even then, under strict terms. The second document was even more shocking: a power of attorney that did not name any of us as his financial guardian. Instead, he had appointed an independent fiduciary recommended by his retirement advisor. In plain English, none of his children had any control over his pension or assets. My brother erupted. "Are you kidding me? You'd rather trust some stranger than your own kids? Dad didn't flinch. Yes, because that stranger is legally obligated to protect me. You aren't. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. My mother spoke up for the first time. You're pushing the family away, John. This isn't the way. But Dad shook his head. This is the way. I've seen too many families torn apart over money. I refuse to let it happen here. This pension is my lifeline. It ensures I can pay for Medicare supplements, prescriptions, maybe even a nursing home if I need it. I will not be left vulnerable. I wanted to argue, but deep down, I knew he wasn't wrong. Healthcare in America is brutally expensive. One unexpected illness could wipe out a lifetime of savings. Without proper insurance or long-term care planning, seniors often lose everything. My father was making sure that wouldn't happen to him. Still, the pain of being excluded stung. It wasn't about greed, it was about trust. And clearly, he didn't trust us. Then he dropped the final bombshell. And one more thing, he said, pulling out another paper. I've updated my will. If any of you challenge my decisions in court, your inheritance will be reduced to $1. Gasps filled the room. My sister covered her mouth. My brother's face turned red with rage. I just sat there, stunned. It was the nuclear option, a legal clause designed to prevent us from fighting over his money after he was gone. Dad, I whispered, why would you go this far? He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Because peace in this family is more valuable than money, and I won't be alive to watch you destroy each other. For the first time, I saw not just an old man clutching his pension, but a father trying, desperately, to protect his family from itself. But instead of bringing us closer, his actions drove a wedge between us. My brother stormed out, slamming the door. My sister cried quietly, and I sat there staring at the legal papers, realizing our lives had just changed forever. But what none of us knew was that Dad was hiding something even bigger, an account none of us had ever heard of, and a secret plan that would shock the entire family.
Dad's words, "None of you will touch my pension," didn't just land like a stone in the living room. They echoed in my chest for weeks. The house felt colder after that day, not because the heater failed, but because silence had replaced laughter. Every meal became a performance, each of us carefully choosing words, pretending that everything was fine, when in truth the wound was still open. Mom, who always tried to be the peacemaker, avoided the topic altogether. She made his tea, placed his pills beside him, and carried on with her usual routine, as if ignoring the issue would make it vanish. But I could see the quiet tremor in her hands. She feared that if Dad's pension was his fortress, then she and all of us were being locked out. I wanted to confront him again, but the old man had built the wall higher than I could climb. Every time I tried, his eyes would turn cold, as if saying, "This is not your territory." And yet I knew something he wasn't willing to admit. Managing finances at that age isn't just about stubborn independence. It's about fear. Fear of running out. Fear of being left behind. Fear of losing control. And that fear was eating him alive. I started researching late at night, searching for articles on retirement planning, Medicare supplements, healthcare costs, and insurance policies. The numbers were staggering. Even with a decent pension, unexpected hospital bills could wipe out savings in months. I knew Dad wasn't seeing the full picture. He thought his pension was his safety net, but in reality, it was only part of the puzzle. He had no long-term healthcare plan, no backup insurance, no strategy. That terrified me more than his words, because when the time came, who would be expected to pick up the pieces? Us, the family he was shutting out. I realized I had two choices: keep fighting with him head-on, or find a way to reach him without bruising his pride. The man had worked his whole life to provide for us. Maybe in his mind, admitting he needed help managing money felt like weakness. And for a man who had built his identity on strength, that was unbearable. So I waited. I let the silence stretch, but inside I was preparing. Then one night, as I sat across from him watching the flickering TV light on his wrinkled face, I asked a simple question. "Dad, what's your biggest fear about retirement?" He didn't answer right away. The room hummed with the sound of the heater, and I thought he'd ignore me. But then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Ending up broke and being a burden." For the first time, I saw not the stern father, not the stubborn man guarding his pension, but an old man scared of tomorrow. That was the opening I had been waiting for. But could I use it to bring him around? Or would even this fragile moment slip through my fingers?
That night, after Dad admitted his fear of being a burden, I felt like I had finally found a crack in the wall he had built around himself. But one crack wasn't enough. If I pushed too hard, the wall might close again. I had to move carefully, like a man tiptoeing on thin ice. For days after, I didn't bring up the pension or money directly. Instead, I talked about stories I'd read, about other retired men, about families who lost everything because they didn't prepare for medical bills, about those who thrived because they had smart insurance advisors guiding them. I made it sound casual, like small talk over coffee, but I was planting seeds. One afternoon, I showed him an article on Medicare and long-term care planning. He barely glanced at it, muttering, "I don't need strangers telling me what to do with my money." His pride was still there, sharp as ever. But I noticed something different. He didn't shut me down completely. He kept the article on the table instead of tossing it aside. That was progress. Meanwhile, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. Her voice was low, worried. "He listens to you more than you think," she whispered. "Just don't rush him. Your father has always seen money as his shield. He's afraid if he lowers it, he'll be vulnerable." Her words hit me hard. She was right. Dad's pension wasn't just numbers in a bank account. It was the last symbol of control in a life where everything else was slipping away. His strength, his independence, even his health. So I changed my approach. Instead of telling him what he should do, I asked him what he wanted. "Dad, if something happened to you tomorrow, what do you want to make sure happens to Mom, to us?" This time he didn't snap. He sat quietly, staring at his hands. Finally he said, "I want your mother to be safe. I don't want her struggling." That was the moment I'd been waiting for. I nodded and gently said, "Then let's make sure that pension, your pension, works for her too. Not just today, but years from now. We can talk to a retirement planner, look into health care insurance, make sure everything is locked in for both of you." He didn't agree right away. He didn't even look at me. But he didn't say no either. And with Dad, silence wasn't rejection. It was hesitation. Hesitation meant he was thinking. That night, I lay awake, realizing something important. Winning this battle wasn't about convincing him to hand over control. It was about showing him that planning ahead wasn't weakness. It was protection. For Mom, for us, and even for him. But would he ever be willing to sit across from a financial advisor, a man in a suit, and admit he couldn't do it all alone? Or would his pride keep him clinging to the very thing he was most afraid of losing? The door was open now, just a crack. But would I be able to push it wide before time ran out?
Convincing Dad to meet with an insurance advisor was like trying to move a mountain with bare hands. Every time I brought it up, he'd change the subject or dismiss it with a wave of his hand. "I've managed my money for over 40 years, he grumbled one evening. "Why do I need some outsider poking into my business now?" I wanted to argue, but instead, I reminded him of something he had once told me. "Dad, remember when you taught me how to change the oil in the car? You said, 'Son, sometimes it's not about whether you can do it.
It's about having the right tools and knowing when to ask for help. This isn't about control. It's about having the right tools." That struck a chord. He didn't agree on the spot, but a few days later, Mom slipped me a small folded note. It was Dad's handwriting. "Fine, one meeting, but I choose who we talk to." I smiled. That was more than I had hoped for. The following week, I drove him to a retirement planning office. The advisor, a middle-aged man named Richard, greeted us warmly. His office walls were lined with framed certificates and photographs of smiling older couples holding hands at the beach. It was cliché, but it worked. Dad sat stiffly, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like a soldier entering enemy territory. Richard, to his credit, didn't dive into numbers right away. He started with stories, real people who had lost their savings because of poor planning, others who had lived comfortably through proper pension and Medicare management. Dad leaned back, skeptical at first, but then Richard said something that caught him off guard. "Mr. Harris, your pension is your legacy. The question isn't how long you can hold on to it, it's how you can make it work for your family even after you're gone." Dad's arms slowly unfolded. He didn't say anything, but I saw it. The shift in his expression, the faint softening in his eyes. Richard explained terms like long-term care insurance, healthcare coverage gaps, 401k rollover strategies, and even the risks of not designating proper beneficiaries. For every point, Dad had a sharp question. For every sharp question, Richard had a calm, clear answer. By the end of the hour, Dad wasn't leaning back anymore. He was leaning forward. His hands, once defensive, now rested on the desk as if he was ready to engage. When we left the office, the silence in the car was heavy. I didn't dare break it. Finally, as we pulled into the driveway, he said quietly, "You were right. I can't take this pension with me, but I can make sure it does what I've always wanted, to protect your mother." That night, for the first time in weeks, I saw Dad sleep peacefully in his chair. The war inside him wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted. Still, one question gnawed at me. Would this new willingness last, or would old pride return to snatch away the progress we had made? The morning after Dad's reluctant meeting with Richard, the insurance advisor, he surprised me. I walked into the kitchen to find him surrounded by stacks of old file folders, coffee steaming at his side. Papers were scattered across the table. Bank statements, pension letters, Medicare forms, most yellowed with age. "Your mother never liked me keeping things in shoeboxes," he muttered without looking up. "But this is why I kept them, to prove I've been on top of things." I sat down and sifted through the stacks, trying to make sense of the chaos. Some documents dated back 30 years. Pay stubs from his last years at the steel plant, letters from the pension office, even old tax returns. But as I flipped through, something troubling became clear. Pieces were missing. "Dad," I said carefully, "where's the actual pension statement for the last 5 years?" His brow furrowed. "It should be in there." But it wasn't. Neither were the most recent Medicare supplement forms or the insurance premium receipts. Instead, we found only outdated paperwork and a few envelopes with blank forms that had never been filled out. For the first time in a long time, Dad looked rattled. His hands shook slightly as he turned the pages. "I always thought I had this covered. I thought everything was in order." I wanted to reassure him, but my own stomach tightened. Missing pension statements could mean anything: clerical error, forgotten mail, or worse. If he hadn't been keeping track, was it possible the account had errors? Or that he had overlooked critical notices about his healthcare coverage? Mom entered the room, tying her robe. She glanced at the papers and sighed. "I told you, Harold. I told you this would happen if you didn't let someone else help." Her voice wasn't scolding, just tired. She had carried the weight of his stubborn independence for years.
That afternoon, I called Richard, the advisor, and explained what we had found, or rather, what we hadn't found. He asked us to come in immediately, bringing whatever we had. At the office, Richard spread the documents across his desk like a detective piecing together evidence. After a few minutes of silence, he looked up gravely. "Mr. Harris, your pension account has not been properly updated since 2017. That means no beneficiary has been listed, and no healthcare coordination is attached. If something had happened to you last year, your family would have had no legal right to your funds." The words landed like a hammer blow. Dad's face went pale. Mom gripped his hand, her lips trembling. "Do you understand what that means?" Richard continued. "Without proper paperwork, the state, not your family, decides what happens to your pension." I saw it in Dad's eyes, pride collapsing into fear. For decades, he had held on to the belief that he was protecting us. Now, in one conversation, that illusion shattered. He whispered, barely audible, "So all these years I thought I was keeping control. But I could have left my family with nothing." That night, Dad sat alone on the porch, staring into the dark. He didn't say a word. For a man who had always prided himself on being unshakable, it was the first time I had ever seen him broken. But even in his silence, I knew something had shifted inside him. He was finally ready to admit he needed help. The only question left was, would he accept it before it was too late?
The day after Richard's shocking revelation, I woke to find Dad already dressed, his tie crooked, his old leather shoes polished. He looked like a man marching toward a battlefield. "Where are you going so early?" I asked. "To the pension office," he said firmly. "If there's something wrong with my account, I'm going to hear it from them directly." Mom and I insisted on going with him. We didn't trust his stubborn pride to handle bad news alone. At the pension office, a young clerk pulled up Dad's account. Her cheerful expression faded as her eyes scanned the screen. She excused herself and disappeared into a back office. Minutes stretched like hours until a manager arrived, holding a thick folder. "Mr. Harris," he began cautiously, "I'm afraid there's an issue with your pension records. According to our files, you took a loan against your pension fund back in 2018. It has not been repaid." Dad's face hardened. "That's impossible. I never took any loan against my pension." The manager slid the paperwork across the desk. There, in black ink, was a signature that looked eerily like Dad's. The date, the amount, $25,000, and the repayment terms were all listed. I leaned closer, my stomach churning. The signature was close, but I knew my father's handwriting better than anyone. Something about it looked off. Dad's hands trembled as he studied it. "That's not mine. I would never sign away part of my pension." The manager sighed. "Unfortunately, until it's investigated, that money is still considered outstanding, which means your pension payments could be reduced or even frozen if this isn't resolved." Mom gasped, clutching her chest. Dad's knuckles went white as he gripped the arm of the chair. "This is my life's work, 40 years on the factory floor, and you're telling me someone stole it?" I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and sharp. Who would do this? Who would steal from a retired man's pension? On the drive home, Dad was silent. Finally, he muttered, "Someone close to me had access to my papers back then. Someone I trusted." The implication hung heavy in the air. Was it possible that a family member, someone from our own blood, had forged that signature? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the pension officer's words, the fraudulent loan, the missing paperwork. If this debt wasn't cleared, Dad's entire pension could collapse. And the cruelest part? The betrayal we were about to uncover would tear our family apart. The next morning, Dad looked at me with fire in his eyes. "We're going to find out who did this, and when we do, I'll make sure they regret stealing from me." But as much as I wanted to believe we could uncover the truth, I couldn't shake the fear that the damage was already done. And worse, the betrayal we were about to uncover would tear our family apart.
The next morning, our living room felt heavier than usual. Dad sat in his favorite armchair, staring out the window at the quiet street, while Mom nervously fidgeted with her knitting. I poured myself a cup of coffee, but the warmth did little to calm the storm brewing inside me. Dad finally spoke, his voice low but steely. "I need a list of everyone who had access to my pension documents over the past 5 years." Mom gasped. "You're going to accuse one of the kids?" "No accusations yet," Dad replied. "But we start with facts, names, dates, access." I grabbed my laptop and began compiling the list. Family members, a few trusted friends, even accountants and advisors who had been involved in Dad's finances. It was a small circle, but small circles are where betrayal hides. As the day unfolded, Dad started questioning each of us with quiet intensity. Every casual comment, every hesitation, every fleeting look became a potential clue. His eyes, sharp and calculating, seemed to pierce right through any facade. "Did anyone ever see these documents without me around?" he asked casually over breakfast. I hesitated. "Well, you did leave some files in the study. I might have glanced at them once or twice." Dad didn't flinch. "Once or twice is enough." His jaw tightened. "I want complete honesty from now on." The atmosphere was tense. Even Mom, usually a peacemaker, couldn't hide the anxiety etched on her face. Each of us began second-guessing our own actions, questioning what truth really meant in the heat of suspicion. By mid-afternoon, Dad had a meeting with a forensic handwriting expert. We watched as the expert examined the loan documents and the allegedly forged signature. Every magnified stroke, every line was scrutinized. "This signature shows discrepancies. It's highly likely someone tried to imitate your handwriting, but the pressure points and flow don't match your natural hand movements." Dad nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. So it wasn't me, but someone I trusted had to have done this. The tension reached a boiling point when he turned to my brother, Tom, who had been unusually quiet all day. "You've handled my files more than anyone else in the past 5 years. Where were you when these documents disappeared?" Tom looked startled. I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't touched anything." Dad's glare was unwavering. "I'll find out, one way or another." The rest of the evening was a delicate dance of words and silences. Each sentence weighted with suspicion. Nobody wanted to admit to mistakes, and nobody wanted to be wrongly accused. But beneath it all, I could feel the family fracturing under the pressure of this revelation. Later that night, I found Dad sitting in the study alone, the pension documents spread across the desk. He looked older, the stress of betrayal etched deep into his face. "They thought they could take what I earned. They thought I'd let them, but I won't. Not now, not ever." I realized then that this wasn't just about money or pension funds. It was about trust, respect, and the right to preserve a life's work. And as the shadows grew longer across the room, I understood something chilling. The family member who betrayed Dad might strike again, if they hadn't already. The next day promised answers, but also more heartbreak, as secrets we never wanted to face were about to surface. The following morning, tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Dad called a family meeting in the living room, his voice calm but carrying an authority that left no room for argument. "Everyone sit down," he said, motioning toward the couches. "It's time we address what's been happening with my pension." My siblings shuffled into their seats uneasily. Tom avoided eye contact, and even Mom seemed wary of what was about to unfold. Dad's eyes swept across the room, landing on each of us like a hawk scanning for movement. "I've discovered irregularities," Dad began, holding up a folder with copies of the pension statements and transaction records. "Some withdrawals and transfers were made without my authorization, and the documents I trusted have been tampered with." A collective gasp filled the room. Tom swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edge of the couch. "Dad, what are you saying?" I asked cautiously, though part of me already feared the answer. "I'm saying," Dad's voice grew firmer, "someone in this room betrayed me. Someone I trusted completely." Tom finally spoke, his voice quivering. "Dad, I didn't—" Dad held up a hand. "Not yet. Let me finish." His gaze shifted to Mom. "I've already spoken to the forensic expert. They confirmed the handwriting discrepancies. This wasn't a mistake. It was intentional." The room went silent. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. "I've spent my entire life working hard, saving every penny from my retirement, and I made it clear, my pension is for me and for the causes I care about. No one in this family, no one will touch it unless I authorize it." His eyes met Tom's. "And yet, attempts were made to circumvent my wishes. Why?" Tom's face turned red. I thought I could help. I was managing the documents for you." Dad's jaw tightened. "Helping? By forging signatures and moving money? That's not helping, Tom. That's stealing from your own father." The accusation hit like a punch. Tom's hand shook as he tried to find words. Mom looked like she might faint. "This isn't just about money," Dad continued, standing and pacing slowly. "It's about respect, trust, and integrity. You crossed a line that can never be uncrossed." I felt a mixture of shock and vindication. For months, I'd suspected mismanagement, but never imagined the betrayal ran this deep. "I've already taken precautions," Dad said, turning to me. "All my accounts are now under joint supervision with my attorney. No one can make changes without documented authorization and legal oversight. I've also updated my will to ensure my pension and other assets go exactly where I want them: charitable causes, health care for seniors, and scholarships for students in need." Tom's voice was barely audible. "Dad, please, I didn't know. I didn't realize." Dad's expression softened slightly, but remained firm. "Intent doesn't erase action. You made choices. Now you live with them." The weight of his words settled over the room. It was clear this was not just a financial confrontation, it was a reckoning. Later that evening, Dad sat with me in his study, the tension of the day still palpable. "I never imagined someone I trusted could betray me," he admitted quietly, "but I've learned that preparation is everything. That's why I put the protections in place before any real damage could be done." I nodded, understanding the gravity. Dad had not only secured his pension, but also taught a painful lesson about responsibility and consequences. "This family will never be the same," he added, looking out the window. "But at least my hard work, my lifetime of savings, will continue to serve a purpose. That's the legacy I want to leave behind, not resentment or betrayal." As I left the study, I realized something important. Sometimes, even in the closest families, trust can be broken. But courage, preparation, and legal safeguards can protect what's truly yours. Deep down, I knew this confrontation was only the beginning. There were still difficult conversations to have, accountability to demand, and a fractured family to navigate. But Dad had taken the first step, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of relief.
The morning after the confrontation, Dad called his attorney, Mr. Harrison, to discuss additional security measures. The phone conversation was brief but decisive.
Yes, Mr. Willis, we'll immediately set up multi-factor authentication on all accounts, restrict online access, and place a fiduciary oversight, Mr. Harrison confirmed. No withdrawals or changes can occur without notarized approval and dual signatures. Dad hung up and looked at me with a mix of determination and exhaustion. I've lived long enough to know that security isn't just about locks and keys, it's about layers of protection. Today, my pension is untouchable, no matter what anyone thinks. Later that afternoon, Dad sat with a certified financial planner, going over his 401k and pension distribution. Each account, each fund was scrutinized. If I don't protect it now, it could all vanish overnight, he said. I won't let decades of hard work disappear because someone ignored ethics. Tom tried to intervene, claiming he could still help manage the funds. Dad's eyes hardened. Tom, your help has already cost me too much. From now on, every decision will be documented legally. No exceptions. I watched as Dad systematically implemented safeguards, account freezes, legal trusts, and notarized authorization for every future transaction. Mr. Harrison drafted documents detailing exactly how Dad's pension would be used: retirement living expenses, healthcare coverage, charitable contributions, and even funding for local seniors programs. This isn't just about money, Dad said quietly. It's about peace of mind, knowing I won't be manipulated or betrayed again. Over the next few days, we organized all legal documents, updating wills and powers of attorney. Each step reinforced his control and independence, and slowly, a sense of relief replaced the tension in the house. Even as the legal measures were put in place, the emotional fallout continued. Family members avoided Dad, aware of his newfound authority and unwilling to confront the consequences of their actions. Mom tried to mediate, but Dad was firm. My pension, my rules. Accountability starts here. At one point, Dad pulled me aside. Remember, it's not about punishing them. It's about protecting what's mine, what I've earned, and what will support causes I care about. Money can't replace trust, but it can secure stability and dignity. By the end of the week, Dad had not only secured the pension, but also restored his confidence. The multiple layers of legal and financial protection were in place, ensuring that any future attempts at manipulation would fail. Tom and a few other relatives tried subtle persuasion, suggesting compromises or promises of future cooperation, but Dad didn't waver. There's no negotiation when it comes to security. The law supports my decisions, and my conscience supports my choices. For the first time in months, Dad could enjoy a quiet morning without anxiety. He sipped his coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise over the neighborhood, reflecting on the months of betrayal and the long road to regaining control. I may not be able to change people, he said to me, but I can ensure they can't change what I've built. As the sun rose higher, it felt like a personal victory, not just a legal one. Dad had turned what could have been devastation into a lesson in prudence, preparation, and foresight.
The following week, the tension in the house became palpable. Every family member who had tried to manipulate Dad now had to confront the reality of his unwavering stance. The pension, the 401k, and every account Dad controlled were now legally untouchable. Tom was the first to break. He tried a conversation over lunch, but Dad's calm firmness left no room for negotiation. Tom, he said, you need to accept that your actions have consequences. I will not allow anyone to exploit what I've earned. The law is on my side, and so is my conscience. Tom left frustrated and silent. Dad's resolve wasn't just legal, it was emotional. For the first time, he felt free from the constant worry that had haunted him since retirement. Later, Dad called in a family meeting, insisting on full transparency. He laid out the documents prepared by Mr. Harrison, explaining each protective measure. dual signatures for withdrawals, restricted online access, fiduciary oversight, and the clear legal structure for disbursements. "This is not punishment," Dad said. "This is accountability. I worked for this, and it will support my retirement and the causes I believe in, not the greed of others." The family's reaction was a mix of disbelief, shame, and resentment. Pearl whispered to Mom, "I didn't know it was this serious." Mom simply nodded, realizing that her husband had taken control of his destiny. Over the next few days, the relatives tried different strategies: soft persuasion, guilt trips, and even subtle threats. But Dad remained unmoved. Each attempt only reinforced the legal strength of his measures. Mr. Harrison advised him to maintain documentation of all interactions, ensuring that any future legal disputes could be easily resolved. Even outside the house, Dad's actions had ripple effects. Friends and neighbors noticed a new confidence in him. He spoke openly about retirement planning, the importance of legal protections, and how crucial it is to guard one's pension and savings. Conversations with his peers became opportunities to educate others, warning them against common pitfalls in retirement planning and highlighting the value of consulting financial advisors and insurance experts. Meanwhile, Dad personally ensured that his retirement income was properly allocated. Every month, automatic transfers funded healthcare premiums, Medicare supplements, charitable contributions, and living expenses. This system made it impossible for anyone to misuse the funds. One afternoon, Dad turned to me with a small smile. "It's amazing," he said, "how much peace comes from control and clarity. I've secured my future, and I've taught them that actions have consequences. Money can't fix broken trust, but it can prevent exploitation." Even the grandchildren began to notice the change. Ethan and Mia, previously oblivious to family tensions, now saw their grandfather as a figure of strength and independence. Dad spent quality time with them, sharing stories of his career, life lessons, and even financial wisdom. He emphasized integrity, responsibility, and planning ahead, lessons they would carry into adulthood. Tom, realizing his repeated attempts to sway Dad had failed, finally stepped back. "I guess I underestimated him," he admitted quietly. Dad merely nodded, a mix of sadness and pride in his expression. By the end of the week, Dad had transformed not only his financial security, but also the family dynamic. Boundaries had been established, legal protections enforced, and trust, though broken, was now clearly defined. Sitting on the porch one evening, Dad reflected on the journey. "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "Facing betrayal is never easy. But I refused to be a victim. I knew that preparation, legal counsel, and decisiveness were the only way to protect everything I worked for." As darkness settled over the neighborhood, he sipped his tea, content that his pension was untouchable, his health care secured, and his independence fully restored. For the first time since retirement, Dad felt truly safe, in both financial and emotional terms. The lesson was clear. Wealth without protection can be lost in a heartbeat. But with planning, foresight, and courage, even decades of betrayal couldn't take it away.
The weekend after Dad secured his pension, the family gathered at his house, but the atmosphere was tense. No one spoke freely at first. Everyone was aware that Dad was no longer someone to manipulate or intimidate. Tom, Pearl, and even Mom hovered near the living room, casting glances at Dad as he reviewed some financial statements. It was clear. The days of casual entitlement were over. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation," Dad said, his voice calm but firm. The words carried authority, the kind that comes from years of experience and a lifetime of earned respect. Tom shifted in his seat. "Dad, we just want to understand why you're doing all this. Why protect your pension so aggressively? I've earned every penny through hard work, decades of responsibility, and yes, sacrifices you may not even appreciate. None of you will touch my pension because I refuse to allow greed or carelessness to undo what I built for my retirement.
This isn't personal. It's protection, it's accountability, and it's law. Pearl, clearly confused, but trying to mediate, spoke softly. We just thought maybe you'd let us help manage it? Dad shook his head. Helping does not mean taking control or expecting entitlements. There's a difference between responsible support and exploitation. You all need to understand that actions have consequences. The room fell silent. Even Mom, who had struggled to balance loyalty between her husband and children, recognized the truth in Dad's words. Mr. Harrison had explained the protections in detail, and Dad's meticulous approach left no room for loopholes. Over the next hour, Dad methodically explained the legal framework he had put in place: dual signatures for withdrawals, fiduciary oversight, healthcare allocations, and automated transfers that made misappropriation impossible. This isn't about mistrust, it's about consequences. You have to face the fact that decisions carry weight. You've learned that the hard way. Tom finally broke, frustration giving way to shame. I didn't realize how serious it would be. I thought I could just manage things casually. You underestimated me, Dad said quietly, eyes steady. I've faced tougher challenges in my career than anyone in this room. I don't tolerate betrayal, and I certainly won't risk my retirement security. Ethan and Mia, sitting on the edge of the couch, looked at their grandfather with newfound respect. They were beginning to understand that money wasn't just about luxury. It was about responsibility, trust, and integrity. By the end of the conversation, the family had shifted. The anger, confusion, and attempts at manipulation were replaced with understanding and acknowledgement of Dad's authority. The legal protections weren't just documents. They were a symbol of boundaries, lessons, and the consequences of past actions. Later that evening, Dad sat quietly in his armchair, reflecting. I've secured my pension, my health care is protected, and my family has learned that actions have consequences. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For the first time since retirement, he felt fully in control, both financially and emotionally. The lesson was clear. Without foresight, even decades of hard work could be vulnerable. But with preparation, wisdom, and courage, one could safeguard the future. Tomorrow, he planned to meet with his insurance advisor to review healthcare allocations, ensuring Medicare supplements and long-term care coverage were perfectly aligned. Every detail mattered, every precaution mattered. Dad had turned a crisis into a moment of empowerment, and the family, for better or worse, would never forget it.
The following week, Dad scheduled meetings with his retirement planning team, including his insurance advisor, a financial planner, and a Medicare consultant. The goal was clear: make sure every decision regarding his pension and health care was airtight, and to demonstrate to the family that his choices were legally and financially sound. Sitting in the polished conference room of his financial advisor's office, Dad laid out the entire plan. I've structured my pension to be fully protected, with clear fiduciary oversight and dual approval withdrawals, he explained, handing over neatly organized documents. I want verification that nothing in this setup can be contested or mismanaged. The advisor, a seasoned professional in retirement planning, nodded approvingly. Mr. Harrison, you've done exactly what every retiree should do. Your funds are secure under federal pension laws. The dual approval system alone prevents unauthorized withdrawals. Anyone attempting to bypass it would be committing fraud. Dad's insurance advisor added, and with your Medicare supplements, long-term care coverage, and private insurance allocations, there's zero risk that healthcare costs will erode your retirement savings. Every potential liability has been accounted for. The financial planner spoke next, flipping through charts and spreadsheets. Even in the unlikely event of litigation from family members, your estate planning documents, pension structure, and legal notarizations make any challenge extremely difficult. You've essentially created a financial fortress. Dad leaned back, satisfied. Exactly. I've spent decades working, saving, and planning. The last thing I'll allow is to have all of that jeopardized due to negligence or entitlement." The advisors, impressed by the meticulous planning, asked Dad if he'd like them to prepare a short report for his family. "Sometimes seeing expert confirmation helps relatives understand the seriousness and legality of your arrangements," suggested the insurance advisor. "Yes," Dad replied. "I want them to understand that I'm not being arbitrary. This is a well-structured, lawful protection of my hard-earned retirement." Later that afternoon, the family gathered again. Dad shared the report prepared by his advisors, detailing how his pension and health care were fully protected under law and insurance policies. The documents outlined the safeguards against misuse, legal validation, and the absolute autonomy he retained over his funds. Tom and Pearl listened quietly, their previous arguments about entitlement and mismanagement fading in the face of expert validation. Mom, who had supported Dad's decisions from the start, nodded with relief. "The experts agree," Dad said calmly. "These funds are secure, the healthcare allocations are protected, and the law supports every precaution I've put in place. No one can touch my pension or insurance benefits without my consent." A silence followed, but it was different this time. It was a silence of understanding, not tension. The children now realized that resistance wasn't rebellion, it was reality. Mia tugged gently at Dad's sleeve. "Grandpa, does this mean everything is safe?" "Yes, sweetheart," Dad said, smiling. "Everything is safe, and your future is protected too, indirectly because we make careful, responsible choices now." By evening, the family began to accept the finality of Dad's planning. They still had questions, curiosity, and some lingering emotions, but there was respect now, a recognition that his decades of hard work were non-negotiable and legally protected. As Dad drove home across the quiet streets of his neighborhood, he reflected on the past weeks, the confrontation, the lessons learned, and the expert confirmations. For the first time in a long while, he felt completely in control, not just of his finances, but of his family legacy. Tomorrow, he planned to take the final step, updating all legal documents with notarizations and witness confirmations to ensure permanence. Every precaution mattered. Every decision mattered. And this time, there would be no room for misunderstandings or disputes. The chapter closed with Dad standing by his front window that evening, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. His pension, health care, and legacy were fully secured. His family had learned a difficult but necessary lesson. Respect, planning, and responsibility could not be ignored.
The morning sun poured through the curtains, casting a warm glow across Dad's study. Today would be the day he finalized every precaution, notarizations, witness confirmations, and legal filings that would make his pension and healthcare arrangements legally unassailable. Dad reviewed the checklist you'd prepared over the past several weeks. Each item symbolized control, clarity, and protection. Pension and 401k safeguards, confirmed with the financial advisor. Insurance policies, reviewed and updated with the insurance advisor. Medicare and supplemental health care allocations, checked by the Medicare consultant. Legal documents and notarizations, scheduled for completion with a trusted attorney. Sitting at the polished oak desk, Dad felt a calm satisfaction. After decades of hard work and a lifetime of providing for his family, he had taken every step to ensure that no one could misuse his retirement savings or challenge his decisions. The weeks of tension, confrontation, and planning had led him here, a position of total control and confidence. The attorney arrived promptly, a small entourage, including a notary and 2 witnesses following closely. The air was formal, serious, yet tinged with quiet anticipation.
Dad reviewed each document carefully, initialing and signing where required, while the notary verified identity and the witnesses confirmed the voluntary nature of every decision. "Everything is in order," the attorney said after the last signature. "With these notarizations and witness statements, your pension and related benefits are fully protected under federal and state law. Any attempt to dispute or interfere will face insurmountable legal barriers." Dad nodded, feeling a deep sense of relief. For months he had faced subtle pressure and questioning from family members, but now the legal armor was complete. Nothing could undermine his decades of careful planning. Later that afternoon, he gathered the family in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, a mixture of curiosity, lingering resentment, and cautious respect. Dad held the folder containing all finalized documents. "Everyone, I want to be very clear," he began, his voice firm but measured. "These arrangements are final. My pension, healthcare allocations, and related funds are fully protected. These decisions are made responsibly, and they reflect the work and planning of a lifetime." Tom, who had previously argued about entitlement, looked down at his hands. "Dad, I see now. You've done everything by the book." Pearl nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "We were wrong to challenge this. You've made sure everything is secure and fair." Mia and Ethan, the youngest, didn't fully understand the legal intricacies, but they sensed the seriousness of the moment. Their grandfather's presence and authority radiated stability and protection. Dad continued, "These measures are not about keeping you away, but about ensuring that no one can misuse what has been earned over a lifetime. Your futures are not in jeopardy because of my planning. They are protected." The weight of reality began to settle over the room. The family understood that Dad's decisions were irrevocable, legally validated, and morally sound. Respect replaced entitlement. Lessons replaced arguments. That evening, Dad returned to his study, reflecting on the journey. From the initial confrontation to the careful planning, consultations, and final notarizations, he had reclaimed not just his pension, but his peace of mind. He poured himself a cup of tea, sitting by the window as the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and amber. The city outside continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the personal milestones achieved in this quiet home. Dad smiled, thinking of the future. His legacy wasn't just in the funds, pensions, or healthcare protections. It was in the lesson his family now carried forward: respect for planning, responsibility, and the consequences of actions. In the coming weeks, Dad would continue to support his grandchildren, maintain his health, and enjoy the freedom retirement afforded him, all without the shadow of dispute or interference. His family had learned a hard lesson, and he had secured a future built on integrity, foresight, and the wisdom that only decades of life experience can provide. As the night fell, Dad's home felt peaceful, secure, and complete. Every signature, every legal consultation, and every careful decision had brought him here, a retirement not just of financial stability, but of true personal empowerment. For the first time in years, Dad could rest knowing that his work, his savings, and his health care were fully protected, and that his family, though tested, had finally understood the weight and wisdom of his choices. Some lessons aren't learned until it's too late, but today, my family finally understood why a lifetime of planning can't be ignored.